The knock on the door came hard enough to rattle the frame. Jonah Cross looked up from the sink, water still running over his hands, heart jumping for reasons he couldn't explain. He dried his palms on a towel and walked toward the front door, each step slower than the last, as if instinct was warning him to turn back. When he opened it, a courier stood there holding a medium-sized parcel wrapped in brown paper, sealed with thick tape. The man checked the label, then Jonah's face. "Delivery for you," the courier said. Jonah nodded and took the box. It was heavier than he expected, dense, intentional. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. From the living room, Marissa's voice drifted out, light but strained. "Who was that?" "Delivery," Jonah answered. There was a pause too long. He stepped into the living room. Marissa was standing now, not sitting where she'd been moments ago. Her hands were clasped together, knuckles pale. "What kind of delivery?" she asked. Jonah glanced down at the box. The handwriting on the label stopped him cold. It was Eli. His son's handwriting hadn't changed much since high school. Sharp angles, careful strokes, like every letter needed permission before it existed. Jonah swallowed. "It's from Eli." Marissa's face drained of color. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "No, that can't be right." Jonah looked up. "What do you mean?" She crossed the room in 3 fast steps and reached for the box. "You shouldn't open that." That stopped him. He pulled it back instinctively. "Why?" Her voice cracked. She pressed her lips together, breathing shallow. "Please, just trust me." Trust? The word sat between them, heavy and uncomfortable. For years, Jonah had trusted her without question. Trusted her when she said Eli was busy. Trusted her when she said their son didn't want calls. Trusted her when she said distance was normal, that boys pulled away from their fathers sometimes. Jonah had believed her, because believing was easier than asking why his own child sounded like a stranger on the phone. "I'm opening it," Jonah said quietly. Marissa shook her head, eyes glossy. "Jonah, please, it's not what you think." "I don't think anything," he replied, "but this is from my son." He carried the box to the coffee table and sat down. Marissa stood frozen, watching like someone waiting for an explosion. The tape peeled away with a sound that felt too loud in the quiet room. Inside were photographs. Old ones. Jonah lifted the first photo and felt his chest tighten. It was Marissa, younger, laughing in a way he hadn't seen in years. Her arm was wrapped around a man Jonah recognized instantly. Aaron Vale, Jonah's former associate, a man who used to sit at his kitchen table, a man Jonah had trusted with business, with money, with his time. Jonah flipped through the photos, different places, different dates, the same closeness. His hands began to shake. "There's an explanation," Marissa whispered. Jonah didn't look at her. He reached deeper into the box and pulled out a folded letter. Eli's handwriting again. His throat burned as he opened it. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means I finally did something I should have done years ago. I don't know how to say this without hurting you, and I hate that, because hurting you was never what I wanted." Jonah's breath hitched. He sat back against the couch, the room spinning slightly as the words blurred and sharpened again. "I didn't stop talking to you because I stopped loving you. I stopped because I didn't know how to look at you and carry what I knew at the same time." "What is this?" Jonah asked, his voice hoarse. Marissa covered her mouth. Jonah read on. "I was told not to tell you. I was told it would destroy everything. I was told you wouldn't survive it, so I stayed quiet. And every year it felt like I was betraying you more." Jonah slammed the letter onto the table. "Tell me," he said, finally looking at Marissa. "Now." She sank into the armchair like her legs had given out. Tears streamed freely down her face, but Jonah felt no comfort from them. "It was a long time ago," she said. "You were never home, you were always working, I was alone." "So you cheated," Jonah said flatly. She shook her head. "It wasn't just that." His heart pounded. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer. Jonah reached into the box again and found a small flash drive taped to the bottom. His stomach dropped. "Jonah," Marissa said, her voice barely audible, "please." He stood up. "No," he said, "you don't get to ask me for that anymore." He walked past her, past the years of shared memories lining the walls and into his study. He shut the door, locked it, and slid into the chair in front of his computer. When the files opened, the truth didn't rush out. It unfolded. Messages, dates, conversations that stretched back years. And one sentence that made Jonah's hands go numb. "There's a chance Eli isn't yours." Jonah stared at the screen, chest tight, ears ringing. Outside the study door, Marissa sobbed. Inside, Jonah Cross realized that the distance between him and his son hadn't been an accident. It had been engineered. Jonah didn't remember how long he sat there staring at the screen. Minutes blurred into something shapeless. The words stayed fixed, unmoving, yet they echoed louder each time he reread them. "There's a chance Eli isn't yours." He closed his eyes and pressed his palms flat against the desk, breathing through his nose like he was trying to steady himself after a blow to the chest. His mind reached for denial first, some misunderstanding, some manipulation, anything that didn't end with that sentence being true. A soft knock came at the study door. "Jonah," Marissa said from the other side, her voice fragile. "Please open the door." He didn't answer. "I know you're angry," she continued, "but locking me out won't fix this." He laughed once, short and humorless, then stood up and unlocked the door. It swung open slowly. Marissa stood there with swollen eyes, her face streaked with tears, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. "Fix this?" Jonah asked. "You don't fix something like this." She stepped inside, hesitating like a guest who no longer belonged. "I never meant for it to go this far." "That's the problem," Jonah said quietly. "You meant for it to go somewhere else." She flinched. "I was lonely," she said. "You were never home. Every conversation we had felt rushed, like you were already halfway gone." "So you slept with Aaron?" Jonah replied. She nodded slowly. "At first." "At first," he repeated. "It didn't start as an affair," she said quickly. "We talked, he listened, he noticed me." Jonah felt something twist inside his chest, sharp and bitter. "And I did." "You provided," she snapped, then immediately softened. "I don't mean that cruelly. You worked, you sacrificed, but you weren't there." Jonah stared at her. "And when you found out you were pregnant?" Her mouth trembled. "I didn't know," she whispered. "The timing was close, too close." His heart sank. "You knew there was a chance," Jonah said. "Yes," she admitted, "but I chose not to know for sure." "Because that was easier," Jonah said. "Because it would have destroyed everything," she cried. "You loved him, he loved you. What good would the truth have done?" Jonah took a step back, shaking his head. The truth would have given him a choice. She wiped her face. "I was trying to protect our family." "You were protecting yourself," Jonah said. Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. Jonah turned back to the desk and picked up the letter again. "You know what hurts the most?" he asked. "Not that you cheated, not even that you lied." She looked at him. "It's that you let him carry this," Jonah continued. "You let our son grow up thinking he was responsible for keeping your secret." Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't know how to fix it once it started." "You fix it by telling the truth," Jonah said. "You just didn't want to." She sank into the chair, her shoulders collapsing inward. "He stopped talking to you because he was confused, because he didn't know who he was supposed to be loyal to." Jonah's throat tightened. Memories rushed in. Eli as a child, waiting by the door for him to come home, falling asleep on the couch with his shoes still on. Jonah had thought distance came from neglect. Now he understood it came from pressure. "I missed years," Jonah said softly. "Years I'll never get back." Marissa reached for his hand. He pulled away. "Don't," he said. Her hand fell back into her lap. "I didn't think you survive it," she whispered. Jonah looked at her then, really looked at her. "You don't get to decide what breaks me." That night Jonah didn't sleep. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around him. Every sound felt amplified. The ticking clock, the refrigerator humming, Marissa's muffled crying from the bedroom. Near dawn, he sat up and reached for his phone. He typed Eli's name, hesitated, then deleted the text. Instead, he wrote, "I read your letter. I'm not angry at you. I just want to talk." He stared at the screen, heart pounding, then hit send. The reply didn't come right away. Hours passed. When the message finally arrived, Jonah's hands shook as he opened it. Okay, but I don't know what to say. Jonah exhaled slowly. You don't have to explain anything, he typed. Just meet me. Another pause. There's a cafe near the river, tomorrow. Jonah leaned back, pressing the phone to his chest. Relief and fear tangled together in his stomach. He was terrified of what he might hear, terrified of what he might confirm. But more than anything, he was terrified of losing more time. The next day, Jonah arrived early. He chose a corner table, his back to the wall, eyes on the door. When Eli walked in, Jonah barely recognized him. He looked older somehow, tired, like someone who'd been carrying weight meant for someone else. They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then Jonah spoke first, "Hey." Eli nodded, "Hey." Neither of them sat right away. "I read everything," Jonah said. Eli swallowed. "I'm sorry." "For what?" Jonah asked. "For not telling you sooner." Jonah shook his head. "You were a kid, that was never your burden." Eli's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know how to look at you and not feel like I was lying." Jonah stepped closer. "You were never lying to me by existing." Eli broke then. His shoulders shook as he pressed his lips together, trying not to cry in public. Jonah reached out and rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm still here," Jonah said, "if you'll let me be." Eli nodded, tears spilling freely now. They sat down together, and for the first time in years, the silence between them wasn't hostile. It was honest. They talked for over an hour, but time moved strangely, stretching and collapsing in on itself. Some moments felt like seconds. Others felt like Jonah had been holding his breath for years and only just remembered how to exhale. Eli stared into his coffee more than he looked up. His fingers traced the rim of the cup again and again, like he was grounding himself in something solid. "She told me when I was 15, Eli said finally. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the hum of the cafe. "She sat me down and said there were things I needed to understand, adult things." Jonah's jaw tightened. "That should never have been put on you." "She cried," Eli continued. "A lot. She said if I told you it would ruin everything, that you'd leave, that I'd lose my family." Jonah closed his eyes briefly. The words hit harder than the evidence ever could. "So you protected her." "I thought I was protecting all of us," Eli said. "But every year it felt worse. I started pulling away from you because being close felt like lying." Jonah leaned forward. "Listen to me," he said, firm but gentle. "Nothing about you is a lie, nothing." Eli looked up then, eyes red. "What if the test says?" "It doesn't matter," Jonah said, cutting him off. "You hear me, it doesn't matter." Eli searched his face like he was afraid to believe it. "But what if you feel different after?" Jonah swallowed. "I raised you, I stayed up when you were sick, I taught you how to ride a bike. Blood doesn't erase that." Eli nodded slowly, something in his shoulders loosening. When they left the cafe, Jonah felt both lighter and more exhausted than he'd ever been. He watched Eli walk away, turning back once to give a small, uncertain wave. Jonah stood there until he disappeared down the street. That night, Jonah returned to a house that no longer felt like home. Marissa was waiting in the living room. She looked up as he walked in, hope flickering briefly across her face. "You saw him," she said. "Yes." "And?" she asked, standing. Jonah didn't take off his coat. "I'm staying in the guest room." Her face fell. "Jonah." "This isn't a discussion," he said calmly. "I need space." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Are you filing for divorce?" Jonah paused. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. "Yes," he said. Her knees buckled slightly and she gripped the back of the couch. "After everything." "Because of everything," Jonah replied. She sank onto the couch, shaking her head. "You're throwing away 27 years. "No," Jonah said. "You already did, I'm just acknowledging it." The next weeks passed in a blur of quiet decisions. Jonah met with a lawyer not out of anger but out of necessity. He disclosed everything. He asked questions. He prepared. Marissa alternated between guilt and defensiveness. Some days she cried. Other days she accused him of abandoning her when things got hard. "You don't get to rewrite this," Jonah said one evening when her tone turned sharp. "This didn't get hard, it was already broken." Aaron's name surfaced occasionally, usually in half sentences and evasions. Jonah learned that Aaron had moved on quickly once the truth began unraveling. He stopped answering Marissa's calls, stopped replying to messages, vanished from the situation the moment it stopped being convenient. That realization stung in a way Jonah hadn't expected, not because he cared about the man, but because Marissa had risked everything for someone who wouldn't even stand in the wreckage with her. Eli came over one Saturday afternoon. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "I didn't know if this was okay," he said. Jonah stepped aside. "This is your house, too." They sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Jonah had helped with homework, where birthdays had been celebrated, where lies had been served alongside dinner for years. Eli looked around. "It feels different." "It is different," Jonah said, "but that doesn't mean it's over." They talked about small things at first. Work, music, the things that had filled the silence between them for so long. Slowly, the distance eased. "I was scared you'd hate me," Eli admitted. Jonah set his glass down. "I could never hate you." Eli nodded, swallowing. "I just wanted you to know, whatever happens with the divorce, whatever comes out, you're my dad. Nothing changes that for me." Jonah felt his chest tighten. He stood and pulled Eli into a hug before he could think better of it. Eli hesitated only a moment before hugging him back tightly. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. In the months that followed, the divorce progressed quietly. No shouting matches, no public scenes. Jonah refused to weaponize the truth even when he could have. He didn't need validation, he needed peace. Marissa's carefully curated image began to crack on its own. Friends asked questions she couldn't answer cleanly. Stories didn't line up. The control she'd maintained for years slipped through her fingers. Jonah moved into a smaller place near the river. It wasn't much, but it was his. The silence there felt earned, not imposed. Eli visited often. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. They cooked together, walked along the water, relearned each other without secrets standing between them. One evening, as they sat watching the sun dip below the horizon, Eli spoke quietly. "I wish I'd told you sooner." Jonah shook his head. "I wish you hadn't been put in that position at all." They sat there, the past heavy but no longer crushing. Jonah realized then that healing wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with apologies or explanations. It arrived with consistency, and he was finally ready to give that again. Life didn't suddenly become easier. It became quieter in a way that forced Jonah to hear himself think. The apartment by the river had thin walls and creaky floors. At night, the sound of water moving just beyond the windows filled the space where arguments used to live. Jonah found himself waking early, sitting with a mug of coffee he often forgot to drink, staring out at the slow current as if it might carry answers downstream. Marissa called less and less. At first, she tried to talk logistics disguised as concern. "Did you forward the mail? Did you see the notice from the bank?" Jonah answered briefly, politely. Over time, even those calls faded. The distance she'd once controlled now worked against her. Eli became the constant. Sometimes he showed up unannounced, knocking lightly like he wasn't sure he still had the right. Jonah always opened the door with the same simple response: "Come in." They didn't try to recreate what they'd lost. They built something new instead. Some days they talked late into the night, voices low, sharing things they'd both kept buried. Other days they sat side by side in silence, watching the river or a game neither of them cared much about. One afternoon, Eli asked the question Jonah knew had been waiting. "Did you ever feel like leaving before all this?" Eli asked. Jonah leaned back in his chair, considering it. "I felt tired," he said. "I felt invisible sometimes, but I never thought about leaving you." Eli nodded slowly. "I used to think you stayed because it was easier." Jonah met his gaze. "I stayed because it mattered." That seemed to settle something in Eli. His shoulders relaxed just a little. The legal process moved forward without drama. Papers were signed. Dates were set. The marriage dissolved on paper long before it fully settled in Jonah's heart. He didn't celebrate. He didn't mourn loudly either. It felt like closing a door to a room he hadn't lived in for years. On a cold evening near the end of winter, Jonah ran into Marissa by chance at the grocery store. She looked older somehow. Not physically, something deeper. Like someone who had spent too long holding something heavy and finally dropped it, only to realize their hands were empty. They stood awkwardly near the produce section. "You look well," she said. "I'm okay," Jonah replied. She hesitated. "Eli, he seems closer to you." "He is," Jonah said gently. She nodded, eyes glistening. "I thought I was protecting him." That was all there was to say. As spring arrived, Jonah noticed how different things felt. Lighter in ways he hadn't expected. The absence of constant tension made room for small joys, morning walks, cooking meals that didn't feel rushed, laughing, really laughing for the first time in a long while. Eli started calling him more, not because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to. One evening, while they grilled on the small balcony, Eli turned to him suddenly. "Do you ever regret not pushing harder back then, when I started pulling away?" Jonah thought about it. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but regret doesn't change the past, showing up now changes the future." Eli smiled faintly. "You always talk like that." Jonah shrugged. "I've had practice." The year moved forward, steady and unremarkable in the best way. And then June crept up quietly. Father's Day approached without announcement. Jonah didn't mention it. He didn't expect anything. That expectation, or lack of it, felt different now. It didn't come from disappointment, it came from peace. The morning arrived warm and bright. Jonah woke early, made coffee, and stood by the window watching the river shimmer in the sunlight. A knock came at the door. He froze for a moment, a memory flickering uninvited. Then he shook it off and opened the door. Eli stood there, holding a small paper bag. "Happy Father's Day," he said simply. Jonah felt something tighten in his throat. "You didn't have to." "I know," Eli said. "I wanted to." They spent the day together without plans. They walked along the water, ate sandwiches from a place Eli liked, talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. At one point, they sat on a bench watching boats drift by. "I used to think Father's Day was about proving something," Eli said. "Like I had to get it right or it meant something about me." Jonah looked at him, "And now?" "And now it just feels like a day I get to be honest," Eli replied. "About who showed up." Jonah nodded, eyes fixed on the water. As the sun dipped lower, Eli stood and stretched. "You ready to head back?" "In a minute," Jonah said. Eli waited. Jonah took a breath. "I want you to know something," he said. "No matter what happened, no matter what we lost, I don't regret being your father, not for a second." Eli swallowed hard. "Good, because I don't regret being your son." They walked home side by side as evening settled in, neither of them in a hurry. Jonah realized then that the truth hadn't destroyed him. It had given him back what mattered most. The weeks after Father's Day passed gently, like the world had decided to stop rushing Jonah for once. Summer settled in fully, the river swelling with rain and sunlight, moving steadily whether anyone paid attention to it or not. Jonah found comfort in that. Some things didn't need to be forced forward. They moved when they were ready. Eli started calling every Sunday evening. Sometimes it was just a check-in. Sometimes it turned into long conversations that stretched past midnight. Jonah never rushed him off the phone. He let the pauses breathe. He let the silence exist without trying to fill it. One night Eli said, "I think I'm finally angry." Jonah leaned back on the couch. "That's allowed." "I wasn't before," Eli admitted. "I thought being angry would make me ungrateful or disloyal." "Anger doesn't erase love," Jonah said. "It just means something mattered." Eli exhaled slowly. "I wish someone had told me that earlier." Jonah closed his eyes. "Me too." The divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom drama, no speeches, just signatures and an ending that felt more like acceptance than loss. Jonah didn't feel victorious. He felt finished. Marissa sent one last message a few weeks later. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an accusation either. Just a short note acknowledging what had been lost and wishing him well. Jonah read it once, then archived it without replying, not out of bitterness, out of closure. Life reorganized itself around simpler truths. Jonah worked fewer hours, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He learned how to cook meals that took time. He learned how to sit with discomfort instead of working past it. He learned that rest wasn't laziness, it was repair. Eli moved into a new place across town. On move-in day, Jonah helped carry boxes up the stairs. They laughed when Jonah nearly dropped one labeled fragile on his foot. You're getting old, Eli teased. Jonah grinned. You're getting brave. That night they sat on the floor eating takeout, backs against bare walls. I used to think everything would fall apart if the truth came out, Eli said quietly. Jonah nodded. I did too. But it didn't, Eli continued. It just changed shape. Jonah looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not the boy who'd grown distant, but the man who had survived carrying something too heavy for too long. Truth doesn't destroy, Jonah said. It rearranges. Eli smiled faintly. You should write that down. As the year came to a close, Jonah realized how different his life felt. Not louder, not better in the way people like to advertise, just real. There were moments of grief that arrived unannounced, songs on the radio, old photographs he hadn't thrown away, memories that still held warmth alongside pain. Jonah let them come and go without fighting them. Healing wasn't forgetting. It was remembering without breaking. One evening, as winter edged closer, Eli stopped by unexpectedly. He stood in the doorway, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. I got the results, he said. Jonah's heart skipped. Okay. They confirm it, Eli said. He's my biological father. Jonah nodded slowly. He felt the information settle, not like a blow, but like a stone placed carefully on the ground. Eli watched him closely. Are you okay? Jonah met his gaze. I told you before, it doesn't change what matters. Eli's eyes filled. I just needed to hear it again. Jonah stepped forward and pulled him into a hug. You're my son, he said firmly. That didn't come from a test. Eli hugged him back, tight and unguarded. I know. They stood like that for a moment longer than necessary, neither of them in a hurry to let go. Later that night, Jonah sat by the window, watching snow begin to fall lightly over the river. He thought about the box, the letter, the fear that had once hollowed him out. The truth hadn't arrived gently. It had arrived like a knock he couldn't ignore. But it had given him something he didn't know he'd lost, clarity. The next Father's Day came quietly again, just like the last. No expectations, no performances, just a text early in the morning. Want breakfast? Jonah smiled as he typed back. Always. They met at the same cafe by the river, ordered the same things, talked about the week ahead, about plans that felt possible now. As they sat together, Jonah realized something that surprised him. He wasn't waiting for the past to make sense anymore. He was living in the present it had finally allowed him to have. And that was enough.